Hello, welcome to this new episode. My name is Carolyn Hinds, film critic and journalist, and this is my interview with filmmaker Zarrar's Kahn about his film In Flames for KCrush American Magazine. So I've seen this film a few times and I love it. I got to see it during the Real Asian International Film Festival last year, and I actually got to do an interview with your editor and your casting director and actor, Mohammed. So I'm very happy to be able to speak to you, Zarrar. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me, Caroline. And I was like, yeah, you look really familiar. I think I saw the photos from Regent Park. And
Yeah.
I was like, where have I? Because I'm like, I don't think we've talked, but okay, that makes sense.
No, we didn't. And I was you because I think you weren't able to make it that night. You were supposed to be on the phone, but you were going to make it that night. So it was just like, yes, I get a second chance to speak to you. So I love this film. I love films that are very layered and makes the audience really pay attention, not only to the performances, but to the themes and the concepts in this film. And I think your film is very layered and it's very theme and it's a psychological thriller. And I think a bit of a horror too. And I think the horror that the film really discusses is trauma. That it talks about generational trauma, but I think also cultural and political trauma, because I think it talks a bit about the separation of Pakistan and India, partition in 1947. So I want first to talk about making that kind of like the underlying theme of the film, which is trauma and separation. So can you talk a bit about that?
I mean, I definitely approach films from, wanting to discuss like certain thematic, like live issues in the society. And for this film, I wanted to discuss um, the way that Pakistan's cultural and political system operates to oppress an entire gender, and how that system makes the individuals who are being oppressed feel like they're alone. And that separation really stemmed from that, where, for the largest chunk of this film, we see this mother-daughter who, while the things that they're navigating are deeply similar, they don't feel connected to each other. They feel like they have to navigate it by themselves and that they're isolated. And what the film says, spoiler alert, is that it's only through community and through people coming together that you're able to survive and you're able to overcome the trauma and the circumstances of where you live. And so going into it knowing that that separation came from this kind of systematic oppression, it was how to create that within the narrative of a film. And like you said, it's a very dense film, and that makes me think about, we had a screening in New York, which was part of our kind of Oscar for your consideration screenings, which is where I was when I was supposed to be with you. And the audience member was like, your film feels like like a lasagna. And I was like, what?
So I get
And they're like, it's very layered. And I'm like, I've never heard it described that way, but I understand where you're coming from. That's actually a very good metaphor, and I love lasagna.
yeah.
So yeah,
No, it's layered, but it's dense, and like the layers of lasagna is like dense. If you make it properly, anyway, if you make it right,
yes.
it will be layered and dense. But the thing is like, so the film is about centered around two main female characters. That's Miriam, played by Marisha Nawal, and her mother Faria, played by Bakhtar Mazar. And these two female characters are just like, they're so interesting to me. And one of the things I have to say to you as a male director is I have to like give you applause for that, because there are not very many male directors and writers who know how to write female characters. And I got the sense from watching this film that you pay attention to the women in your life, but also the women in culture, and you listen to them, because you really get into how male domination and patriarchy really affects women on a intrinsic level, like on a physical level, but also on an emotional and psychological level, and there isn't really there's some physical trauma that takes place later in the film, but a lot of the trauma comes from like just things that men say, and the things they do, and the things and the way they look at women, the way they look at us, and they just like make us feel very uncomfortable and unsure in our space. And you really get into that with the characters of Miriam and Faria, because you really show how like everything for women could be considered a threat. you know, like there's this scene where she goes to see the kind of like the priest, like the shaman, and like she has her hand out, and like that fear of putting your hand out for someone that you can't see. I felt that was such an that's one of the, I think one of the most potent scenes in the film, where like you're just like, and like other people around her is not noticing, but she's just like, so talk to me about just like getting that sense, that really sense of trepidation and unease that women feel around men, especially men that we're supposed to trust, but we know like something about you was off, and like being the only one to really sense that.
I think, I mean, a lot of it comes from the incredible female collaborators that I have. Going into this film, you know, for me, the director's role is really to shape the performances, but the eyes of the film are the cinematographer. And we had this incredible female identifying cinematographer named Egol Nurbulatova, who was the eyes that we were seeing. So having that as a key collaborator on set, as well as having my producer Anima Boss, who's from identifying, my line producer, who Carol Nerona, all incredible women who've carved out a space for themselves in the film industry, which is male dominated everywhere. In Pakistan, it is more so.
Mhm.
So making sure that we had that perspective behind the lens really informed what was happening in front of the lens and how we created that environment of feeling suffocated at every turn. And also the incredible collaboration with my Bakhtaur Mazhar, who plays the role of Fariha. I met her in 2018 when we did a short film together, and she ended up being really a key collaborator and giving me notes on the script about her own experiences of being a woman in that society, and being a mother, and being a wife, and being a working woman as she, navigated her way through the performing arts. So it was really, working with these incredible collaborators and amplifying their experiences and creating a film that spoke to all of that in the way that it feels, which is why I was really deeply attracted to genre cinema, because what genre does is it is so much more visceral than other types of cinema for me. It can make you, it'll put you on the edge of your seat. It'll have you feeling that suffocation, that feeling as though the ground is always shifting and there's no safety. And we knew going in that we had to craft that world with intention. And I'm happy to hear from what it sounds like it worked.
It did. The film, I've seen it probably like 3 times now, but it really, the sense of unease that's, I sometimes when I go into spaces where sometimes I'm the only woman, like if for instance when I go into like here in Toronto, we have the train, the subway, like as it is going to the subway, and if there's just like a bunch of men in the subway, I have in like the train car, I have to think, do I go in this train
Yeah,
car, or do I go and look for another one to get
yeah,
into? And it's like I automatically always put my back up against the wall. I'm always like very careful where I sit. I very like intentional looking for exits, and that comes through trauma, but also through lived experience, that we as women, and this sometimes discussed recently, there is no guarantee that whatever space we enter into is going to be safe for us.
yeah,
There is no guarantee that every man that we're going to meet is not going to want to harm us, or even look at us with ill intent, or say something that's going to be triggering, and like just like really makes us off center. So I think you really do get the sense of that, because there's a character, Celine, who's played by Muhammad Ali Hashim, who also is the casting director. And I kind of saw him as, he's kind of like the antithesis of the character, the maid, I guess you could say the male protagonist, Assad, played by Omar Javad. And I'm like, they're two like opposites, like Assad comes in like the hero in the knight in shining armor, and he doesn't last very long. I'm not going to spoil it, but he doesn't last very long in the story, because the way how you and your costume director, the designer, really put it is like Assad is on the same level and the same mindset as Miriam at the beginning. Like his clothes matches hers. She's wearing like the green, and his shirt is green, and when they go out to the beach, she's in pink, and his shirt is mirroring her in that. But Celine comes in, and he seems like a knight in shining armor, but then it's just like he's a representation of like the men who say like all men, like not all men, but I'm like kind of sort of, because like he turns out not to be the knight in shining armor she needs. And I kind of saw him as a representation of the trauma of both her and her mother Farah experience, where like you're taught to trust these men, and then you realize you can't trust all men. So talk about that, about how you have as Assad and Celine, I think, being opposites, and like, but also being examples of the kind of men that women interact with in our daily lives.
I think what I really wanted to show beyond the men is that these women don't need a knight in shining armor. They are their own knight in shining armor. This is refuting the idea of there being a damsel in distress, and that the only way to save yourself is by saving yourself, by finding other people from your own community who, through that strength, you can find a path forward. And for the men in this film, I wanted to really show that they are as good as the society expects them to be. And that is Usid, who is playing a role, who's new to the society and imagines that this is how he's supposed to behave. And Salim, who's from that society, and so is playing the role that he knows that he's expected to play. So it is showing, how these men in the film are products of the place. And Karachi is a city that is a hard place that produces hard people that have to make hard choices.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so the thing that really makes, I think, In Flames really interesting to me, is that talking about Miriam and Fari in particular, they kind of switch roles like through through the end of the second act. At the beginning, Miriam is very assertive, she's very confident. She's a young woman and she's in school, she's studying. Her mom is a homemaker, she's a stay-at-home mom, and her mom she's not submissive, but she looks for men to tell her what to do because that's how she's been conditioned to live, but to look for men to like handle the household, the finances, everything. And so Miriam is frustrated with her mother because of that, and like her mom is, and then once the grandfather passes, like Faria tries to assert herself, but Miriam was like, you can't assert yourself because you've never demonstrated control. But then that's where you're talking about the community and like saving yourself, like this, as because of the trauma that Miriam suffers, she becomes more closed off, like she suffers asthma attacks, she becomes very anxious, she becomes very afraid. And first of all, kudos to, like I told the editor Craig, kudos to him, but also to the cinematographer and the sound designer, because this film is very atmospheric. But when the atmosphere really starts to get dark and like oppressive and like tension, like Miriam's whole persona changes. And like I think Ramisha did a fantastic job, like really switching tones. And then Faria steps up to the plate. She's like, you know what? My daughter needs me. I can't be submissive anymore. I can't be waiting for men to come and save me. And because I need to save my daughter. And I think the way how you display their trauma is very interesting. So Mary's trauma is very obvious. She's scared. She's on shore. She's like looking out through for everything because she's seeing ghosts. But Faria's trauma isn't as obvious. I think her trauma displays in her submissiveness. That's her trauma response, to be submissive, to back down from men, to look for men to console her. That's a trauma response. So talk about making us like, I think making those specific things a trauma response for a character like Faria, because people would say, oh, like that's not trauma. I'm like, it is. Expecting people to do something for you is kind of a trauma response because that's how she's been conditioned.
And for me, it's also kind of like youth looking at age and age looking at youth. And like when you're younger, you haven't experienced as much of the world, and the world hasn't given you what it can give you, and Freya is someone who's already grown up in that society, who's had to navigate it, and maybe her idealism has shed, versus Mariam is someone who still feels like the world, even though it's a difficult place, the world is still, she's full of potential, and she thinks that anything is possible, and not understanding why her mother is not as ambitious as her, is not as capable as her, until she suffers trauma herself. And it's both of them realizing that they're sharing this trauma, that they're both navigating similar circumstances, and that it's only by them, and rather than that trauma driving a wedge between them, which so often it does, it's how to come together despite that. Because for me, I've worked in mental health for a long time. It's something really close to me. And we've seen that people who have experienced extreme trauma, how that lingers with you and what that response is over time. Immediately maybe it's more visceral, but 20 years down the line, it um, demonstrates in a different way. And like you said, it's only when Friha really realizes that there's no more support, that now she has to save her daughter, that there's no one else there, that she's able to um, bring herself back and show the agency that she had when she was younger.
Yeah, and I think that's important because it shows that sometimes, like you want to be your own hero, but sometimes you can't be. And it's then until something forces you to really step up to the plate and say, I don't really have a choice, but so this is a choice I'm gonna make. And her choice was to protect her daughter, and that was important because there's none of the men I should say not even men, but the male characters can't be trusted because there's a young brother and like he's just there as this thing, he has the privilege of just being male. He's not expected to do anything and he doesn't show any interest in wanting to do anything. And so like these two women realizing, wow, all we really have is ourselves, and like, and I think even for our side, even though he may seem like a knight in shining armor at first, I think he's in a way not an antagonist. Oh yeah, no, I'll call him an antagonist in a way because he doesn't realize how his own behavior places Miriam at a disadvantage. How it could affect her socially, and him coming from Canada is coming with the whole Western idea of like I'm the knight in shining armor. I know about female solidarity, but feminism. I'm a feminist and all that, and I'm like, yeah, but you also got to meet these women where they're at. You know, you can't
That
be a
is
knight in shining
better
armor,
than
but you
I
got
can
to meet them where
describe
they're at.
it. And he is a fish out of water and doesn't understand that this society works in a certain way and his behavior has consequences.
Mm-hmm.
And his behavior has consequences for Maria.
Yeah.
And there's that scene where they're at the police station where we wanted to show this, where this is a place where he has no idea what he's doing, but Mariam is the one who takes control because she knows the spaces, she knows the society.
Yeah.
So it is, there's nuances to what feminism is and how agency demonstrates itself. Really, there's Western ideas of it, and there is the rest of the world, and it's a big world, and uh, you have to navigate it to the best of your ability, and really depending on the cultural, the way that the culture operates.
Yeah, you can be a feminist and support these women, but you also got to realize the dangers that you're placing them in. Like being a feminist means also stepping back and letting Miriam, as you said, like really take control in that situation. Like I'm like, sir, you don't know what you're doing. Like, stop it. But for my last question, I want to talk a bit about I want you to talk. There's a particular scene that I really love that is really striking. And it's a scene where Miriam is in the hospital and like she's like her brain, she just kind of goes into these fugue states and she sees herself in the beach house. And I'm trying not to spoil it, people, but she sees there's this beach house and where a lot of things happen. But she transitions into this beach house and all we see is her face. And the reason we only see her face because she's wearing like she's wearing the hijab and she's wearing all black, but she kind of blends into the background. And she herself looks like a specter, she herself looks almost like a ghost in that scene. And then she sees herself and she walks onto the beach. And then she transitions into her family home. And I just love that whole sequence where like she's in the hospital, then she's in the shadow looking like a ghost herself, and then on the beach and then back. So talk about that scene in particular, because I just love that whole sequence. Like kudos again to the cinematographer and to the editor.
Yeah, Igor and Craig are both incredible talents, and it was a pleasure to work with them. And we wanted to show it as though, she is navigating through her own memory, and she's an observer in her memory because she's witnessing a memory that she, as a trauma response, tried her best to suppress.
Mm-hmm.
And now, as in her own world that she's navigating right now is starting to crumble, those memories that she suppressed are now bubbling to the surface. And it is, she is in many ways a specter in her own brain at this point as she navigates this trauma that she tried her best to forget. And, technically shooting those scenes were so hard,
Yeah.
such a challenge. You know, we were shooting in a real hospital that was still working in Karachi. And a memory I'll always take away is that, you know, that's a oneer. So it's one long take of her walking down that hallway.
Mm,
And when we finally nailed that take, it was take number 14. And that was a pregnancy ward.
mm.
And a guy comes running out of her room next to us and he's like celebrating. And we're like, oh, why are you celebrating that we got the take? And he's like, no, I'm celebrating because my wife just had a daughter. And we were like, what? And like, and then he came and he like gave us sweets. And it felt like it really tied to the film because, you know, often in more conservative societies, men don't celebrate if they've had daughters. And
Mhm.
our film is talking about that. And for that to happen when we nailed that take, I'm like, we're doing the right thing. We're in the right place, you know?
Yeah, no, I love that sequence because the way she just and like the way she just turns around and she's in the room and then she's in a mirror and then there's the scene where she just closes the door. She's like, yeah, no, I'm not ready to confront this particular Mary. Yeah, shut the door. And then she's back there. So like I think like and like having as you were saying it, I have the same thought, like him having a daughter and celebrating it is not from my understanding of Pakistani and also Indian culture, like girls are not really celebrated. But so the fact that that happened while you're filming a show of making a film about motherhood and daughters and like women having to like be their own agencies but also wanting to be protected but not being, it's kind of like serendipitous, you know. I think it is a good thing. But I love that entire sequence and like the cast and the whole team and everyone did a fantastic job. So we have to wrap it here, but I really love the film and like congratulations to you and to everyone involved.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Carolyn, for having me. And I'm happy we were finally able to do this.
I know, right? And I might be able to see you later this week if I get another interview.